course you came here for Pradeep. We are a big fan. You have made it to the culture of you, me, and we. We have offered this training before at CalTrin, and guess what? It's so popular. We have to do it again. We want to do it again. So let's talk a little bit more about Pradeep. On the next slide, Pradeep is a pediatrician and a community health leader, past president of AAP, CA3, that's a lot of letters, and a member of the board governors at the San Diego Foundation. He has enormous expertise and knowledge in child development, infant and early childhood mental health, childhood trauma, parents' perception of childhood behaviors, and cultural issues in healthcare and in general. And so we actually use one of Pradeep's culture videos in one of our trainings to help highlight just because he is so knowledgeable on this topic. And so, with that being said, I'm sure you're so tired of hearing my voice by now. So, I will hand it over to Pradeep to take it over.
Great. Thanks, Casey.
You're welcome.
So welcome, everybody. Good afternoon for those of you in California. And for some of you, I know we have folks from all over. We actually have a really large group today. So far, we got about 78 people on. So thank you for joining us. Um, as we mentioned, we're going to be talking about culture. And really, we're going to be talking about the idea of how culture is really something that's evolving and is more individualistic than we have said in the past. So what we really want today is for this to be a safe space. Um, oh, I'm sorry. So today's the goals are we want you to understand what culture is. We want you to reflect upon what your beliefs are and consider how they developed, and to consider how our beliefs and sense of identity contributes to our feelings of mattering and belonging. So with that, we really are going to want these expectations. So I'm going to ask you to reflect, and I'm also going to ask you to add things to the chat. And again, we want to create a safe space so you can express yourself. And one of the big things to me is just respect for everybody and humility that we only know our own experience, and we'll be spending a lot of time on that. We want you to be participating in whatever way is comfortable for you. We want you to be able to be vulnerable. We want you to be willing to learn and change. And we also want you to know that you're valued and you add to the richness of our community. And, this is truly a journey. We're going to do this as a journey, and we're going to have times to stop and reflect. And during those times, I really want you to really just spend a moment or two answering the questions and really just thinking about it. And we'll be checking in and getting your thoughts on these. So if you feel comfortable sharing, we'll ask you to share. If you want to put it in the chat, you can put it in the chat. But mainly, we want this to be for you. We know that in these trainings, there's so much information. And the key thing is we always think, oh, I'm going to go back and watch that training again, or oh, I'll go back and do that. We often don't get time to do that. So we want you at the end of this day to feel like, hey, I spent 3 hours and I really got to think about things that are going to be very relevant for me as an individual, but also me as somebody who is working with families and working in the community, and really allowing you to understand that each one of us is such a unique individual, and how to really get to those elements of our unique individual person that we are. So I'm going to ask you to do something, and it's kind of funny. I'm going to ask you for your first impressions. You've heard my bio, you've heard me speak a little bit. So why don't you go ahead and open up the reflection guide, and just take a moment to jot down your first impression of me. No one's going to see it. No one's turning it in. And we'll check back on it later. But, what is your first impression? I've been talking for about a minute or two, and you may comment on my physical appearance, my voice, my bio. Whatever your first impression is, just go ahead and just take just 15 seconds, 3 seconds, jot those things down. So, the heart of this talk is really something that's, I think, sadly missing in our society today. It's that sense of us. And when I talk about the promise of us, when I jokingly did it the first time, I was really talking about the United States and the promise that the United States is, where people from all kinds of backgrounds can come together and really have an opportunity to succeed and thrive and live in freedom. So, I was making a kind of a play on the United States, but then the more I've done this talk, the more that I really feel this actually has global implications to really think about the power of us as humanity, and really, really thinking if we can start looking at one another in a more nuanced, thoughtful, sophisticated way, we really get the opportunity to see the beauty of each individual that we come across. And, really, in a certain way, each person is like a jewel, and those jewels together make a mosaic, which is really what this earth is about and this planet is about. And I know it sounds really grand, but really it starts with our one-to-one interactions. So you got my bio, but I just wanted to also give you a little context for what I do. Everything I do is focused on children and families in the center, right? So parents with their children live in systems and cultures. So if you look at my work, on one corner you see the yellow sun, which is nurture, and the green sun, which is healing. Those are really important aspects to all of my work as it relates to not only children and families, but our systems and our culture. And some of my work is focused in how we nurture across our lifespan. This work that we're talking about today, the culture of one. I also spend a lot of time talking about human development using a child development framework. And I also spend a lot of time working with systems. And all of this stuff, healing relationships are really important. So these are just the areas that I work in. And you can see a little tree in the corner because that's really what we're doing. We're planted in this sense of goodness, growth, being grounded in the flow of nature, because we are part of nature as well. So that's kind of the background, the framework. And we are going to be talking about experiences. We are going to be talking about our families. We're going to be talking about things that can sometimes be very triggering for folks. So I want to be very respectful and just really quickly talk about trauma. Trauma is a result of an overwhelming amount of stress that exceeds our ability to cope and integrate those emotions involved in an experience at that time. We all have things that have happened in our lives that were overwhelming. And again, trauma differs between individuals. And we both could be in the same situation and really come out of it very differently. And really, at the end of the day, it is our unprocessed events, experiences, and emotions that can trigger us. The reason I bring this up is if you are at all triggered anytime during this presentation, please step away for a moment. And when you do step away, go ahead and breathe. Just take a moment, tune into your body and your mind. If you need to break at any time, just step away. I'll put this up to breathe as we go through this. And again, we're just really respectful of you and your experience. And so if you do come across something that is activating, remember what Casey shared, that this information will be sent to you later on. So if you need to take a break, if you need to walk away, don't worry, you'll still get the material. So let's start with part one. And part one is just really about culture. So what is culture? So I'm going to ask you to just go ahead and throw in the chat what comes to your mind when you hear the word culture. So I'm just going to pause for a second. Go ahead and just throw in the chat. When you hear the word culture, what comes to mind? I'm not peeking the chat. Oh, we got some folks jumping in. Great. People's way of life, norms, beliefs, values, traditions, backgrounds, diversity, traditions, way of life. Great. Food, religion. Food, we can say food again. One of my favorite ways to think about culture. Things that make you family. Wonderful, wonderful. Beautiful ceremonies, background, histories, values. Great, great, great. Okay. Really love seeing all of this. The depth of experience for any individual. Great. Languages. Great. Languages, customs. Great. Okay. This is wonderful because culture is actually a really big term and a big concept. So everything that you all added is part of it. So we'll just spend a little time talking about culture at a couple levels, um, and then we'll explore what it means for each of us. So the big definition is culture is the way of life. Some of you put that in there, especially as it relates to socially transmitted habits, customs, and traditions and beliefs that are characterized by a particular group of people at a particular time. And many of you had these pieces. It includes behaviors, actions, practices, attitudes, beliefs, values, communication, patterns, traditions, etiquette, spirituality, concepts of health and healing, superstitions, institutions of race, ethnicity, religions, right? So I love the phrase that it's the lens that we look at the world, it's the lens through which we look at the world. And often culture's hidden. Our own culture is often hidden from us. We'll frequently say, oh, well, that's the way things are. And particularly if you're from a majority culture group, identifying those norms and values can be a little bit challenging, right? And you don't always think, hey, this is culture. We just think that's the way it is. So our current conversation about this has been really focused on race and ethnicity. And, just kind of basic definitions. Race is based on phenotypic features, primarily skin color. Ethnicity is a group of people who identify with each other on the basis of shared attributes that distinguish them from other groups, like a common set of traditions, ancestry, language, history, society, um, religion, social treatment within their residing area. So that's a really a difference between race and ethnicity. And typically, individuals identify with their country and their ethnicity. And I just want to pose this question. We hear the term Latino, we heard the term Asian American. Are those really meaningful terms? Because Latin America is huge. My friends from Puerto Rico are very different in the way that they see the world and go through the world as my friends from Mexico and my friends from Argentina. Everyone's really different. Friends from different parts of China are different from my friends from Korea, my friends from India. So again, we use these terms and they're and it's it's part of our culture that we use these terms, but really trying to get away from thinking about things so narrowly. So let's take, for an example, a little girl who has dark skin, and the US Census says she's Black American by race, but she may be of Jamaican American ethnicity, and she's a fourth generation, and her cultural heritage is American. And so, these are just, again, you see these slices, but how does she see herself and how might it influence the way that she gets help? All of us are, well, not all of us, many of us on this call are in fields where we're helping others. And so, again, we see somebody and without knowing their background and their history, we don't really know um, how they perceive things and how we can best help them and how we can best connect with them. So I jokingly say, is every oops, lost my slide there. I jokingly say, is every interaction cross-cultural? And I actually treat every interaction as cross-cultural. I assume that each person has what I call a culture of one. They have some different characteristics, which we'll go over, but each person is so individual and so interesting that if we go with that respectful, humble approach, we'll find out that really every interaction is cross-cultural. Now, one of the things that I've done along the way is I've stepped in a lot of cultural potholes. Part of doing work in this area of culture means you're going to make mistakes. And much like a pothole, if you're walking down the street and you step in a pothole, you twist your ankle, but you keep going. And what I find with people is when I have made these mistakes, if I'm just open and share with people that I'm sorry I didn't know that. Could you please tell me more about yourself and the way that you see the world? I think it's been very rare that a person doesn't open up and tell me a lot because people want to be known. People want to share what their experiences are. So again, with that kindness and curiosity, it goes just such a long way. And again, I always feel like people want to tell you their story. So, whenever I've stepped in a cultural pothole, I find a way to welcome people in to hear their story. And I actually am genuinely very curious about their experiences. And I find every time that I've stepped in a cultural pothole, I end up learning something and I have the opportunity to grow. So when I think about this concept about a culture of that's each one of us, I really think about the human universal experiences, and we'll talk about those, the universal dimensions of being a human, our culturally our culturally influenced experiences in learning and conditioning. And then I also think about our personal uniqueness. There are things that have happened to you that will make you unique. And if we can really see where all three of these intersect, that's your own personal culture, your unique culture. So let's talk about those universal dimensions. This is biology. It's, food, reproduction, physical comfort, movement, growth, awareness, awareness for mortality. We all have emotions. There's some discussions about what are our basic emotions, but there are emotions that everybody feels in different societies: happiness, sadness, fear, anger, disgust, envy, excitement, boredom, surprise, shame, guilt. These are things that show up in every society. But the physical expression of those can be a little bit more culturally bound. Um, and so when I think about the human universals, I always think about Maslow and Maslow's hierarchy and how he talked about our need for our physiological survival needs, our sense of safety, our sense of love and belonging, our ideas of esteem, and what it means to grow up in any society. These are those universals. And one of the parts about Maslow that's just wonderful is he's one of the early pioneers of positive psychology, where he wasn't looking at what was wrong with people, but what was right with people. And so that whole perspective is really great. Now it's interesting because Maslow actually never created the pyramid. One of his colleagues who was in the business world came up with it and kind of marketed it, and it stuck and people just kept using it, and Maslow didn't correct it. But if you read Maslow's work, he really talks about um, any behavior tends to be determined by several or all of these simultaneously rather than one. So we have this image of like, oh, I have to do this, then I do this, then I do this. He saw it more like waves. And so again, just really understanding what we know of Maslow is often very, very simplified. And his work is actually really beautiful and elegant. And in his later days, he was more interested in the idea of self-transcendence, like what made Mother Teresa, what makes Gandhi Gandhi. And again, just beautiful work, really, really interesting work to read. So again, I had mentioned that with our emotions, culture influences our universal experiences. And so, like the basic emotions, um, it's really thought that we have seven basic emotions, and there's some, different arguments around that. But all humans have the ability to experience these feelings, although cultural factors may influence how they're expressed. And what fear looks like in one country may look different in another country. And the country's tolerance for emotions can be very different as well. This is also true within families, and different families within a culture will have different perspectives. And when we start thinking about, remember we talked about the universals. Now, if we talk about culturally influenced pieces, it's things like social constructs, family, territory, who's in an in group, who's in the out group, rules around marriage, rules around governing sex, status and roles, division of labor, special occasions, rituals, mourning when we lose somebody, trade, gift giving, laws, government, leadership. These are all socially constructed. I love art. You can see art, dance, poetry, games, how we play. These vary from culture to culture. And also the beliefs of, what we can't see, supernatural beliefs, religious beliefs. These are all parts of culture as well as values. Our values are very, very culturally bound. A sense of right and wrong, reciprocity, justice, honesty. How do you deal with conflict? What is the outlook towards violence? Commitment to something greater than oneself, self-respect, humility, service to mankind, helping others, how we care for others, our elders, our young ones. So again, you see that these cultural influences are there. So I like this model of a tree. So you can see I keep coming back to this tree metaphor. And I like to think about this in terms of culture. So the surface culture is what you can see, right? So that's like things like language, food, dress, hairstyle, art, literature, housing, holiday and celebrations. You can see that, right? So you can think about that as surface culture. But then when we go to the roots, the more shallow culture are the unspoken rules and norms. And so anthropologists, this is what they study. So, like I was talking about, displays of emotions, attitudes towards elders and raising children's, concepts of time, our verbal and nonverbal communication. Eye contact is a big one. understanding hierarchy, gender, privacy, work, money, who's a trusted source of information, honesty, integrity. When an anthropologist goes into a community, they look for these things and they look to understand and they talk with people and they try to understand these unspoken rules and norms. Now, even a really good anthropologist after a year is only going to get so far. What ends up happening where you go to another country on several occasions and you spend a lot of times with folks, you start getting into the deeper or the core culture, which is really the soil within which our societies develop. And it can be challenging to uncover. So, what are the underlying values, like notions of truth, identity, um, our unconscious assumptions? It's things like the cosmology that guides ethics, spirituality, health, and theories of group harmony. These are a little deeper. And so, if you're studying a culture, you need to really start really paying attention to these at a deeper and deeper level. So why don't you go ahead and pull out your reflection book. We're going to stop for a second, and I'd like you to just take a moment. We'll take about a minute or so. How would you describe your culture to someone from another culture? What would you share with them that's easy to see? What would you share what's underneath? And then what would you share with them that's deeply held? If you were somebody coming from another country or another part of the United States, but how would you describe your culture to another person? So I'll just give you a minute to really just take a moment to reflect on that. So as you're finishing up, I'll just share a quick funny story that came to mind. I moved here from Boston, about 25 years ago, and I was working over at the Children's Hospital and was with some friends, and they stopped and they started talking, and they're both surfers. And they started talking, and they honestly were using words that I wasn't familiar with, and they were focused on their experiences, and they spoke a different language. And I started to laugh. I'm like, oh, yes, I need to learn a little bit about surfing culture because it's a big part of San Diego. So it's interesting that even within the United States, there's so many different aspects of our culture. We actually have a very rich cultural heritage, but we'll talk more and more about why and where different groups have that. So let's go move ahead and start talking about this idea about our personal uniqueness. So we've covered the human universals, things like birth, death, marriage, family units, things like that. Those are human universals. We've talked about some of the cultural things that happen, but now let's talk about our own personal experiences and what makes us our gives us our personal uniqueness. As I mentioned earlier, culture is the lens that we see through. So we create lenses and filters based on events and experiences, our culture and our history, and our belief in our stories. And the experiences can be personal stories, family stories, cultural context, both current and historical. Also, the context of, of, of our culture. The context that we live in before and after COVID has changed. The context of where we are now versus where we were 20 years ago has changed. And again, we have a culture, but it's very influenced by what's happening around us. Other things are expectations, beliefs, memories, and stories. These are the things that actually create our way of seeing the world. So much so that I really think about the fact that we all live in a bubble of perception. And again, the events and experiences of our life, our culture and our history and our stories and beliefs really affects where how we go through the world. And if we could actually really say that we all live in a bubble of perception, that can we respect that the other person's way of seeing the world is different than ours? This can also be within one's own family. And so when I think about this idea of a bubble of perception, I go a little bit deeper and I really think about what's going on underneath, right? So we're actually pretty good about our thoughts. We can talk about our thoughts, but our thoughts, our emotions, and our sensations are swirling around inside of us. And they really come together and help create our beliefs. And so on a day-to-day basis, when you meet somebody, you don't know what they're thinking, you don't know what they're feeling, and you don't know what they're sensing. But when we talk with people with words and stories, we can get a view into their way of seeing the world, their bubble of perception. We also can look at their actions and behaviors. And so we can kind of become detectives and we can actually say, let's go ahead and look at our own experiences and let's explore that. So again, I just have that same list and I'm going to go through a couple slices of my background. So you heard my bio, but here's a little bit more about my background. I was born in Bombay, which is now called Mumbai. My parents immigrated here when I was 18 months old. I'm a first generation immigrant. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm a big Cleveland sports fan, which is really hard to do. They're always awful. I've had frequent trips back to India at 5, 7, 9, 11, 13, and 17, and I saw inequity and suffering. I come from a progressive, tight-knit Indian community in Cleveland that I grew up with. Our families were from different parts of the country, so we actually all spoke English. My mom was the first female surgeon at the Cleveland Clinic, so women's rights are really important to me. My father was an engineer and he worked for GE for 25 years and he had a systems approach to things. He was a systems engineer. So when we had parties growing up, my family would debrief either that night or the next night about like how could we do it better. So quality improvement's part of our lives. And my parents were 9 years old when what's now Pakistan was still part of India, and they had to move. And my grandparents were in their 50s and they lost everything. So they had to rebuild their lives at 50. So my family has this really strong story of resiliency. As I mentioned, my mom's career was very busy. We were really lucky. We had a person who was considered our housekeeper by title, but she really was like a grandmother to me and was really a big part of our family. And so, I consider her like my American grandmother. So that was part of my growing up. So that's some lenses of my growing up. Then, if we look at my cultural journey for my education and work, I went to public school. As I mentioned, I'm really big into anthropology. I was an anthropology major, and I looked at culture and covert inequality. I worked for the CDC, so I was doing field work and public health. I worked for a congressional commission, and my office was all women, so I learned a lot about how men and women communicate differently. I went to med school. I'm a second generation doctor. I studied some traditional Chinese medicine and some other pieces. So I'm open-minded to other ways of healing. I did pediatric residency in Cincinnati, where we took care of all the children in that region. So I really learned population health. I did research and got my master's in public health in Boston. So again, my work was on culture and ADHD. When I first came here to San Diego, I worked on chronic illness through asthma and again, really focused on health inequity. I studied with a gentleman who I'll quote a few of his things, Don Miguel Ruiz. He was a neurosurgeon in Mexico and also came from a family of shamans and went back and learned shamanism himself. I'm trained as a yoga teacher. And currently, for the last 20 years, I've been working in developmental and behavioral services. So those are my experiences. And if you asked me, how does that affect my lenses and filters? I would say, for me, relationships are central to everything, especially family. That story about my grandparents and my parents immigrating from India to here really builds a lot of resiliency in our family. I call myself Indian-ish. I'm not able to speak the language, the Hindi. So when I go to India, I need people to help me. And so I'm not as able to move through both cultures. I just was up this weekend visiting my cousin who had a baby. She came here and went to college. She grew up in India, came here for college, and has stayed and worked here. And her husband is the same. He grew up in India, went to college, and is working here. They can move between India and here without any problem. They're comfortable in both cultures. And so, they really are like truly bicultural. Um, as I mentioned, culture is really important to me. I see culture in everything. Inequality and justice, both along race and ethnic lines and gender, are very important to me. I was trained in Western medicine, allopathic training, so but I'm open to other ways of looking at healing. I do a lot of work in development, so I'm particularly important to me are attachment, attunement, and regulation. In my work, I've come across a lot of trauma and how people grow from trauma, post-traumatic growth. The work that I do is focused on family supports. And so I look at families as a unit and how we can support them and look at their strengths. And as I mentioned, nurture is important to me. How do we help everybody grow and develop? And I'm open and curious about others. So that's my lenses and filters. That's kind of an example. I know that's a lot of information, and we're going to have you go through and think about this for yourself and your own experiences. I give you a lot of these for you to look at it. So let's take one of these examples. As I mentioned, I'm a second generation doctor. So I grew up just really, it's really wonderful to grow up having a mother who's a doctor, spending a lot of times in hospitals. And so I was there. But when I went to med school, I said, hey, there's more to this. So I did study other types of medicine, other ways of healing. And so I'm open to that. And so I know that there are times that I talk to my colleagues and they look at me like you're crazy. Why are you talking about acupuncture? Why are you talking about this? Why are you talking about that? And again, I spent time on the East Coast, and in that culture, these alternative medicine, as they call them, although traditional Chinese medicine, traditional Indian medicine have been around for centuries, they think it's something different, and they're not always so comfortable with it. And so again, that's just an example of how I grew up in a culture and I saw that there were some limitations to that culture. And I'm also very careful about how do I navigate my beliefs that are outside of that cultural system. So that's an example of how your lenses and filters affects your world and how sometimes you have to navigate between cultures. So again, I want you to really take that opportunity to look at your words and your stories, your actions and your behaviors to help you look underneath and see that. So we'll do that in a moment. But I want to come back to that exercise that I started you with your first impression. I shared two windows into my world, my growing up and my work career and academic piece. How has your perspective of me changed? What changed? Why? So just take a moment to reflect on that. And again, if you're feeling bold, you can put it in the chat. If you want to say something, we'll welcome you to have a comment. I know it's a big group, but we do want you to be engaged. And I use this term very intentionally over window. I gave you two windows into my world. We can only see through the windows of another person's world. We can't see their full inner world. And so I think it's really important when I go back to this slide of being really humble and understanding we cannot see the inner world of others. All we can do is see a window into their world. Okay. So we are, let's see what time we're at. We're doing great. We're at 1:40. And now I want you to do this yourself. This is your turn. And we're going to spend a little time as we go through the rest of this journey with you taking a moment to write down and journal. And I really encourage you to take a moment when we have the personal reflections to just write things down and to just take a moment to think about it. And what will happen is you'll have some ideas, and then later on, more ideas will come with you. That's why we wanted you to have a reflection guide. So again, I am always very, very cognizant that things can be triggering for folks. So if anything comes up, remember to breathe. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to walk through a various set of questions to really give you a chance to really look within your own experiences. So let's start with the first one. What contributes to your personal culture? Your childhood, your family, your community, your experiences, your education, your intergenerational history. And we're going to spend a little time. We're just going to sit here for a little bit. I'm going to give you like a good chunk of time, about 5 minutes here. to really look at these questions of your personal culture and how does that personal culture influence how you see the world. So I'm going to give you some time and let you reflect on it. And then we will open it up for folks to share a little bit. So again, we'll go for about 5 minutes. And so this is that time I wish we would have had some music. Um, but we'll go ahead and give you 5 minutes to just reflect. So go ahead and think about what were those, what contributed to your own personal culture, and how does that influence how you see the world? Okay, and I'm just going to add because there's some comments. Um, Someone said hard to tease out the difference between culture and values. That's okay. You know, values are a part of culture, and so each culture has differences in their values. That's a good piece. Um, yeah, great, great. I'm going through the chat, really enjoying the comments in there. Yeah, I caught my CalTrin team off guard. So next time we'll do with the reflections from here on will be a little bit briefer. They'll be about 2 minutes. So my wonderful CalTrin team will help me with timers as we go up. So I'm going to go ahead and see if anybody wants to open up for comments or questions, um, or questions or comments about anything that we've talked about so far. But also, if you want to share anything that comes to mind to you about like what shapes the way that brings things up. We have a beautiful share in the chat about being bullied led me to be more sensitive and empathetic. Um, and coming from a military upbringing, which was rigid and authoritarian. That is such a beautiful insight, and really looking at how that really affects the way that you see the world. You're brought up in a way that things were kind of black and white, but you had an experience that would be negative in terms of being bullied, but you turned it into a positive that really led you to be more empathetic and interested in others and not wanting others to have that experience that you had, which is beautiful, right? So the experiences can be negative, but you can turn them into a positive. And again, I think like, so much of this stuff is happening under our radar, right? And it is one of those pieces that, as I mentioned, I do a lot of work around trauma, but when we look at trauma and trauma in the context of healing and relationships can turn into the fuel for growth. And so that was such a lovely share about, I had a bad experience, but I used it as fuel to growth to become a better human being. Another beautiful one about parents and grandparents struggling helps me value other cultural perspectives on healing trauma and mental health. Absolutely. We see a lot of stigma. We see a lot of different things that impacts our work where we're trying to help folks. And if there's intergenerational trauma, um, you know, in medicine, we say that when a person doesn't listen to us, they're non-compliant. Are they really non-compliant? Maybe they didn't understand us. Maybe they have something that was traumatic that prevents them from acting on that. So again, this whole idea of understanding um, healing trauma and mental health from different cultures is really important. And there's some beautiful work by a gentleman like back from the 70s and 80s, Arthur Kleinman, who really looked at these ideas of mental health cross-culturally. Anybody want to be bold and come off and speak or just chat? It's all really great. Ah, great one. Okay. There's a great share about speaking one language at home and learning another language at school and having to translate in your head when you're speaking English with classmates. And it really does become a big part of your personal culture. It also taught flexibility, patience, and how to adapt to different environments. Beautiful, beautiful. I think this is really getting at this whole piece of like how amazing our experiences are. And then when folks share like that just really gives us so much more insight. I see a hand up, Dakota. Okay.
I'm so sorry it wouldn't let me unmute.
Okay.
I'm watching the news, and there's a real pushback against millionaires and billionaires right now. And I
Mhm.
feel that so strongly. I think because I did grow up in a less affluent neighborhood. So I think I'm just aware of it more. And I'm feeling like a lot of
Mhm.
people, that resentment of, how much money do you need, to get
Mhm.
by in life? So that's affected how I'm experiencing current politics. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for that insight. So what I love about your insight is um, not that long ago, we thought being a billionaire and a millionaire was the greatest thing. And we thought, wow, if you're a billionaire, you must be so smart and you must be so wonderful and what a genius you are. And you're right, the cultural context has changed to, why do these people have so much and unwilling to share? So absolutely. I see another hand up, Martha. Great.
That's me.
Yes.
Yeah, in my case, I came to this country my first generation,
Hmm.
and I'm from Mexico. And then for me, Mexico is super hard when I was a little to go to school because the money, always
Hmm.
the money.
Hmm.
But when I come over here, I try to go back to school, and I'm 54, and my my mom say, "You already older. You don't have to go back to school." I said, "No, mother, never ought to go back to school." And I have to learn the language because in Mexico we only speak a dialect and Spanish.
Hmm.
I come here, I say, "Oh my God." I told my husband, "How are we going to do this? You have to learn it." I said, "Okay." And just like the other comment, I have to translate in my head.
Yes.
I have to say something. And I say, "Oh my God." And now I'm very confident. I can say something, and I know how to think before I say, "Did I say it the right way or the wrong way?" I say, "No,
Hmm.
go, Martha, you can do it." And that's why I say it's hard. It's hard to learn from another culture.
It's hard, and you're just speaking of the challenge with language, right? And there's even more challenges. The customs. Am I doing this right? What are the rules? This is different than what I grew up with, and we'll talk about this about as we grow up, we learn these things without language, like it's implicit, like it's there. And what's beautiful about what you shared is the immigrant experience. It's fascinating. We can talk to people from different places, and there's some similarities and differences in that, right? And at the same time, that piece of that energy of someone who's willing to take that kind of a risk and start in a new country is just amazing. And you build such strength, right, by doing that. And again, you said your husband said, "Well, you just got to learn," and you said, "Okay, I'm just going to learn." And you had that period where it was hard, and now you feel comfortable, and that's this piece what makes this country so rich, right? People come in with these experiences, but that energy that you bring then becomes, a benefit for all of us.
Yeah, and that's why you have to put. I put my goal when I came here. The first time I started my husband, I'm not going back to Mexico if I'm not have a paper. I said, "Honey, stop dreaming." And now 15 years later, I have a paper, and I said, "I have to be a citizen." I said, "Hi, honey." 5 years later, I did it again. And they said, "You see, honey, you only have to put your goal. Follow the goal, and you're gonna get it." And they said, "Now I believe you." And they said, "Yeah." I always, when I try to follow something, they say, "I have to get it. I have to finish that one.
Absolutely.
This is gonna be me." And I told my daughter, right now, I want to be a teacher. And I told my daughter, "I want to be one day, you and me, we're gonna graduate just like a teacher." And they said, "Mom, it's gonna be so powerful to see my mother and me." I said, "Yeah, I'm gonna be there with you, and we're gonna graduate over there."
And there is the beauty, right? Like
Yeah,
there's just that beauty of family transmitting those values of resiliency, the belief. All of these pieces are just so beautiful. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you. We have some lovely comments in the chat as well. I love the comment. This could go deeper and deeper, like peeling an onion, the skin off of an onion. I wrote some surface things, and I could probably write for hours. Absolutely. And I actually encourage all of you, this is just the starting point. We're just going to start off on this. We'll be taking a break shortly, but after that break, we'll be going through these personal reflections and stopping and talking a little bit because you can see as we talk, you hear things and you can reflect, and it gives you chances to really go deeper with this. But this is really an opportunity to start the journey. And I love the fact that one of our participants said, I could write for hours. Absolutely. The other part is let's look at this kind of work with our own teams and our staffs that we work with to really help us become more and more mentally flexible, more open, more curious. The more that we do this and the more that we meet people where they at and see them for who they are, the better we can serve them. And that's really all of you on this call are in a space of wanting to serve others. And so we want to do that. I also want to highlight another one, which is as the youngest of three children, but the one who had the most responsibility um, within the family. So again, birth order doesn't always determine what happens. It's that piece where you have a role within your family and then what happens, right? And what goes on. So we would normally say, oh, youngest child, they're going to be the one that has the older children will take care of that. No, it's not that way. Let's see. Yeah, so somebody was sharing that they had folks that worked in their house that were of a different culture, and gave them a chance to learn. I'll tell you, it's fascinating, right? Like if we have someone who's taking care of us, who's from another culture, as a child, you're learning these things again implicitly without like instruction, like it's not said out loud, but you're learning these things and you're seeing things. And for me, that's just a great opportunity to appreciate and enjoy that people go through the world so differently. Um, Yes. Okay. Yes. And so here's a great one. It's interesting that we are compelled to put positive or negative attributions on cultural aspects. Military culture may be negative or positive. If you're operating within that and adherent to the norms, but you're operating outside that, it can be perceived. So I love that comment because, again, for me, culture is neither positive nor negative. Our experiences are our experiences, and we may be within a culture. And on one hand, that may give us a real sense of belonging, which we'll talk about later, or it may give us a sense of being excluded, right? So the culture itself isn't the piece, in how we work in it and how we fit within it is this very nuanced way of doing things. It's not a one size fits all. There's no right answers. The values that we grow up with are the values that we were taught and we learn innocently. And we're actually going to spend a good chunk of time on that idea of how are we learning these things? How did these come into place? And in the third section of the talk, we'll be spending a lot of time on this concept because I want you to be able to see on how these things influence us, when they influence us, and we do it with innocence, right? So I don't think, I think we all grow up with an openness and an opportunity to learn and grow. And when we see how these things work, I think we can be a little bit more accepting that others may be more rigid, others may be more flexible, and actually there's room for everything. And we should be able to respect people who are of a culture and they rigidly adhere to it. There's others who are part of a culture who rebel against it. All of it's part of the human experience. So again, that openness and that diversity of our experiences is really what makes humanity. And again, coming back to this idea that I talk about, the promise of us. Humanity expresses itself differently in incredible, beautiful ways, and each individual really matters. Each individual is an important part of the mosaic of humanity. And can you imagine a world where everyone is valued for who they are, however they are? That's really why I teach this. This is really what I want. Is I want a place where everyone can feel comfortable, safe, and able to express themselves. And I think the more that we, like, I love this, the negative and positive connotations, right? So again, it's bringing that to something which is part of the human experience. And I love that you brought this up because that then allows us to be aware, are we putting a value on it? Are we saying good or bad? And we'll talk later about when we can do that. Then we can actually start to pause and say, does that serve me? Does that not serve me? So wonderful. Thank you for the comments. We're coming to the close to the top of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and do the 3-minute break at the top of the hour. And I'm looking up. Casey's
Yep,
here,
here
so
I
that's
am.
going to help.
Yeah.
So we'll do a 3-minute break, and then when we come back, we're going to be doing more of this reflection, and it's reflection conversation, and really want you to think about this. And again, if you feel like, oh, there's so much more that I want to say or do, you're welcome to do it. I just want to make sure you have enough time to do some of it when we're all together. Before we get started, I just have to say how much I enjoy working with our CalTrin's team. They make it really wonderful. I get to show up, do my talk. They take care of all the details. And so just a big appreciation. And as Casey mentioned and I mentioned earlier, this material you'll get links to all of this stuff. And again, I do encourage you to go however deeply you want to. This is really the first part of the journey, but we want you to look at this material and think about this material as it relates to utilizing in other places. And I just want to put another pitch in for really looking at the great materials that are available on the Caltrans website. There's just an enormous amount of material that's there for you to use and to really help yourself grow, your teams grow. There's just such great materials from things like strengthening families to things around trauma, really just wonderful materials. And just such a great resource that's free. Okay. So when you think about culture, take a moment to reflect again. Actually, before we do this, let me just take a moment to check in. Are there any questions or thoughts or anything that folks want to share before we go into this next section, this next series of reflections?
Currently, there are no questions in the Q&A pod, but of course, we can give a moment for people to either put
Okay.
questions in the Q&A pod or please feel free to raise your hand and come off mute. We would love that as well.
Yeah, and just if you want me to expand on anything that was said earlier, I know it was a lot of material. So we'll just leave that open and we'll go ahead and we'll do a few more reflections and we'll stop to have people kind of share different pieces if things come up. And again, thank you for the chat. That makes it gives me an opportunity to interact with you more. So again, just a reflection. When has the culture of your family given you strength? And when has the culture of your family limited you, right? Where have you not fit in with your culture or where, just think about those pieces. So I just want to again give you about a minute to just think about it. And after you do that, we'll, see if anybody wants to share. And there was a moment where I muted myself. I don't know why I did that. All right, great. I see some folks are in the chat. So as you're thinking about that again, I just want to come back to my own family, and I was sharing how, my family gave me strength, right? Um, I always think like when I have a bad day, I'm like, this isn't as bad as what my grandparents went through. Or I think about my parents when they first came to this country and we talk about those stories. Great. There's a comment in the chat about the culture of origin in terms of religious and political beliefs and values. Absolutely. I think many of us have that experience, and that's can be quite a challenge. Personally, gender roles are incredibly important and incredibly interesting to talk about. If we look around the world, gender roles have been changing, and societies don't change as fast as the roles have changed. This is also big because many of us who are immigrants come from cultures that have very traditional roles in kind of very fixed ways of doing things. So wonderful family, my family and my education have served me well. Absolutely. I think the openness and curiosity helps us. As I mentioned, for me, not having Hindi as a language has limited me in some ways, but it also made me not as kind of focused on a specific region in India. And again, it probably makes me a little bit feel more connected to being here in America rather than, as I mentioned, my cousin and her husband are able to move back and forth. They feel very comfortable in both places, but you can also miss certain things of different places. Okay. So again, I just want you to reflect. So I love sharing this picture of my brother. He's holding my niece, who is now 21 and about to graduate from nursing school. So it's really quite a dated picture. But I bring this up because we have a running joke in my family. My brother has three kids, and he was saying to my mother one time, "Hey, mom, I can't get over the fact that my three kids are so different." To which my mom answered, "Have you met your brother?" And again, we're very different. He's very active. He's a high-powered executive who recently retired. I am more contemplative. And it's just very funny. We're very close, but we're so, so different that you would really wonder, are these two guys from the same family? And again, that's just that beauty of it is that, the differences between and within, right? So members of the same culture can vary widely in their beliefs and their actions. We all have unique identities that we develop within our culture, but these identities are not fixed or static. And this is the reason that stereotypes don't hold up. No two individuals in any culture are exactly alike. And this is really a big piece of what drives me and drives my work is when I started developing this material, cultural competency was a really big field, and everyone was talking about being culturally competent. And people would come in and start telling you things about this group does this, and that group does this, and this group does that. And it just seemed like stereotypes to me, and it seemed not to honor the individual. So again, we want to honor the individual and we want to honor the culture, but we also want to honor the fact that we're all human beings. So again, I shared the story of my brother. And so think of a family member who your personal uniqueness overlaps with, and think about a family member who your personal uniqueness doesn't overlap with. And just think about that. And I mentioned my brother and I overlap on certain values and don't overlap on other values, but we're very close and we get along great. So it's really always been a great way for me to reflect that when I meet people who might be different from me, it doesn't mean that we don't share a lot, but really, it's kind of an interesting thing. So just think about those individuals in your family or even your friends circle. So as you're reflecting on this, I just want to share another beautiful comment in the chat. The culture of children should be seen and not heard, rob children of their voices and their advocacy. That is a very, very British perspective. Children should be seen and not heard. And the British really did rule over, colonized a lot of the world. So many of us that come from countries that were colonized by the British, this notion that children should be seen and not heard is big. And then becoming a teacher, the same individual becoming a teacher, really required her to unlearn this stuff and to really honor it. And again, that's part of what we're doing today is we're taking a look and we're seeing what builds the way that we are. And part of the opportunity is to unlearn. And how do we unlearn some of these things that we've learned? So I don't know if folks have anything that they want to share around families. Yeah, I match with my dad. I don't match. Great. And I love that comment about I match more with my dad and not with my mom. I notice some of my sisters are the opposite, and some are able to match and overlap with both. I don't share some of those things with my mom. Absolutely. This is that piece of how we overlap and what does that mean for our relationships. And again, I love my brother. I talk to him about a lot of things. There's some things that just aren't part of what he's interested or things where we have in common, I talk to other people about those things, right? And so again, it's just that beautiful part of you get to learn so much when we start just reflecting on this idea and how do we connect and who are we close to and what are our relationships like? Because again, we're going to come to this next piece, and this is the piece that I think is really important for us to be thinking about is this notion of identity, right? So, and this is loaded right now because we have a lot of, identity politics, but let's keep that all out of things. And let's really just think about identity. And identity refers to the properties which we feel a special attachment or ownership to. It consists of those properties that make us the person that we are or what distinguishes us from others. And it could be personality traits, likes, dislikes, abilities, belief systems, moral code, what motivates you. They are unique for you, right? And so you have this opportunity to see where your unique identity is, right? So just think about that for a moment and really reflect on this idea. What do you identify the most in your own personal unique culture? And it can be more than one aspect. You saw what I shared with you earlier. There's many aspects to who I am, and it might be different in different situations. Who I am at work and what my identity at work is different than my identity at home. Not that I'm a different person, but I don't use certain things at work that I use at home. And it's not that I'm a different person, it's just different aspects of my identity are expressed. So why don't you go ahead and take a moment again just to really reflect on what do you identify the most with um, in your own personal unique culture. And if things don't come to mind, don't worry. I realize that there's some slides coming up that'll be helpful. Chat. Resilience, great. We'll be diving into this question a little bit more. And also, yeah, here we go. Bringing people to the table. My family believes we should leave things a little better than we found them. Yeah, these are beautiful. These are beautiful things that we're sharing. Um, it's an interesting thing too. So I'm sharing this idea of identity, and we're going to talk about identity as it relates to creating cultural gaps, and we're also going to talk about it as it relates to a sense of belonging. But I also want to share with you one of the things that I had the opportunity to do when I was working with the individual I mentioned earlier, Miguel Ruiz. We had an exercise called recapitulation where we actually wrote down our personal stories so many times and so often. And he really wanted us to become less identified with it, to give us more mental flexibility. And I do think it really is a beautiful opportunity for us to um, have flexibility about our identity. And we can use it when we need to use it and not use it when we don't need to use it. And um, again, he wrote this book called The Four Agreements, and one of the four agreements is don't take things so personally. And it really is that idea of becoming less defensive and more open to others. And so I love the idea of, really looking at what do I identify with? What really like, you know, how, what do I do that makes me uniquely me? So let's go through some things about cultural gaps, and we'll start thinking about that a little bit. So, let's think about what creates cultural gaps. So, part of the reason I've been doing this work for so long is when I was in medicine seeing patients, I realized there were so many times where there was a miscommunication. And at first, I actually did a lot of work around improving communication skills. But then after a time, I realized that communication skills are important, but these skills about navigating culture are so important. And I really started noticing cultural gaps that really, when it came to treating patients, I really wanted to know more about. And so here's a list. And again, I have this list up, but I also am always happy to see what other things cause gaps, right? So race, language, nationality, immigration, religion, our ages and our generations, our gender, sexual orientation, income levels, education, occupation, military service, where you grew up, if you're in a long-term marriage or a long-term relationship or a marriage, children, pets. Um, I became a dog owner later in life, and now I'm one of those crazy dog owners. And I bond with people over dogs, right? And also have friends that don't like dogs, right? So here's some of the things. Think about what other things can create potential gaps. Um, I currently am living in San Diego, and San Diego is a very, very strong military town. I learned a lot about military after I moved here that I didn't know about the importance of command, how things work, how the different branches are different, how there's differences within branches. And so there's some gaps in communicating if I didn't learn those things and if I didn't understand their culture. I could say, well, you need to do this. And they'd say, well, I have to check with my commanding officer. So again, these are very interesting aspects. So I'm opening up the chat. Oh, number of aces. That's a great one. What creates gaps? Yes, people who have aces, adverse childhood experiences, and there's great material at CalTrin's about aces. Skin tone, pigmentation. Yes, colorism is a big piece. Political views. Yes, absolutely. Sports team. Sports teams. Absolutely. I'm laughing because as I mentioned, I'm from Cleveland. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan no matter what. Number of siblings. Absolutely. So I wanted to have you take a moment. Great. Languages you can't use. Values. Absolutely. These are all great things that can create gaps. Blended family or not blended family. That's a big one. If you don't have that experience, people just don't always understand it. And blended families can come with a higher level of complexity, particularly as we're around the holidays. Who do I spend time with? Birth order. Wonderful. I want you to go ahead and really think for yourself. Where have you seen or experienced gaps yourself? Disabilities, that's a great one. Um, where have you seen gaps or experienced gaps? And this can be personal, this can be in the families you serve. I really appreciate the one about disabilities that just got put in. I think I think it is a big issue that we see for families, particularly if their child has a disability, on how you're treated by others as individuals with disabilities, how you're treated by others really is there. So just go ahead and we're going to just do just a minute of taking that time to reflect and see if there are any gaps that you've experienced. Ableism and affluence is another, right? And again, I welcome you to add things to the chat. Or again, we welcome you to open up and share a story. Again, when we talk about these things, we just open ourselves up to learning from one another. In communication, mental health diagnoses, absolutely. Self-awareness and accountability. Okay, so as we are here, I'm going to take a moment of I'm going to take a little prerogative to talk a little bit about something that I think is really, really important about mental health. And I want us to stop for a minute and talk about mental health because I think there's some really important conversations we need to have as a society and a community, right? Many of us come from diverse communities, and in those communities, our stigmas around mental health are a big issue, right? And that's going to really impact people's ability to utilize services. The other part is most families, if there are mental health issues, don't want to talk about it with others, right? So we have a lot of folks who are suffering in silence. And so, and we have another great comment about the ways people's brains work, right? Like, that people are really black and white. But I really do think that this whole idea of mental health and again, what creates that stigma, what creates that barrier to getting care is often what our cultural values are. So again, I think it's really important for us to look at that and to really consider how do we work with mental health and how do we make that uh, where people are feeling comfortable. Again, same thing with disabilities. You know, there's a comment in the chat that I think is really important. Um, I think when we make assumptions that what people can do or can't do based on what we see as a disability is such a disservice. And really being able to ask individuals and see what they're able to do, what they're not able to do, but how do they want to handle things? What kind of help or what kind of autonomy we give people? These are really important pieces. And so these gaps that can be created are just, again, those areas that we just need to be sensitive about. There are some cultures where it's, you know, the women do not talk to men. And again, do I agree with that? Again, that's not mine to agree or disagree with. If I'm providing clinical care, if that's their culture, I need to be able to respect that culture. Do I agree with it? Probably not. But at the same time, my focus has always been on treating parents and their children, right? So again, these are those pieces where you have to navigate, and all these situations are different. So again, thank you everybody for the shares in the chat. And I'm just going to flip it. So just think about this. Also, our sense of identity and connection and belonging are also created by these same things, right? And if there's something that you've had in your life that's challenging and it's been a part of your life, then not only can it become part of your identity, but also can be part of where you have a sense of belonging. If you are with others who have been through similar experiences. I'd mentioned earlier with someone who shared the piece about immigration. I work, in the intro, we talked about that I am at the San Diego Foundation on the board, and we started a fund that really is focused on our Asian American community, and we've done some really fun listening communities. And what struck me was how much similarity there was in the immigration story, how much unprocessed trauma is in the immigration story, how much discrimination is in there. And we heard a lot of universal pieces across the varying groups that are called Asian American. And then we saw that each of the groups had diversity. Within the groups, there was diversity. And yet, in our listening communities, they said, if you asked us where we want to invest in, where we would like help from philanthropy, it's about mental health for our youth. And what do we do for our elderly, our uncles and aunties? How do we make sure that they have good lives as they age? So it was just this beautiful thing of seeing the diversity and the beauty, the similarities in experiences, the similarities in desires and needs, and yet that really important sense of wanting to be seen for who they are and who each community is, and that each community, even within themselves, is not the same. So again, I just love the opportunities, particularly in a community as incredibly diverse as San Diego, and many of you are from California, and California is incredibly diverse. And it really just allows us to tap into the richness. So again, I have these up there. We talked about some of the other pieces, and I just want you to think about that. Let's just take a moment again and really think about this idea of what part of your identity gives you a sense of belonging. All right, so would really like to open it up to everybody before we go into the third part about how we're enculturated, how we learn all this stuff. I want to stop and just check in with everybody to see, what are you hearing? What are you learning? What are the things that are um, what's tickling your brain in this presentation? I just want to hear from you what you're taking away, and what you're thinking about at this time. So again, you can do it by chat. You can join in raising your hand, but I'm going to pause for a moment because I really want to hear what folks are thinking as we think about these reflections. Great. Crystal's hands up.
Good afternoon. So I'm so glad you're asking these questions. My mind, when you said what's going on in the brain, a lot is going on. I'm trying to put words to the thought. And
Hmm.
I'm like really resonating with what's happening in the chat and how folks are coming up with, these thoughts. And I'm like, I can think it, but I really can't say. But it really gives me an opportunity to have some insight and reflect and
Hmm.
name who I am and how I show up and move in the
Hmm.
world and space. And I've really been challenged with figuring that out. And these questions and the prompts and probes and the guides have been very helpful. That's what I'd like to share. I do want to say the thanks for the guide, but the formatting, I it's hard for me to adjust. So I'm just using it to guide me, but I'm using some another document. So, but I am going through and using this, and I'm really excited to share it. Thank you.
Crystal, thank you. And before you jump off, what kind of communities do you work with?
I am in a lot of communities. I live in Sacramento, California,
Great.
and I'm currently in spaces with residents and neighbors and
Good.
community partners and organizations. And we're actually a community health and action coalition. And I myself am an immigrant from Liberia, West Africa, who came to the
Great.
States. So it's like a lot of things. I'm still in those spaces because the residents that I'm working with are identified in some way, and we find strength in each other. So we really want to amplify our strengths and kind of learn and grow from learning about each other. So thanks.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, first off, I really appreciate you sharing and also sharing in a very authentic, vulnerable way of saying, "Hey, I've got a lot, this has opened up a lot of things for me to think about. I might not be able to put it all down right now, but it's really helping me." And that's what we really want to do is just kind of open it up. And I'm stopping so that you have a chance to kind of wrestle with it a little bit, but also to see how others are responding, because then I think that also helps with that piece. And the reason I asked about who are you working with is, wow, can you imagine sitting down with groups of people and having people share some of their stories of who they are, how they got here, what they're bringing with them, how they see the world. And I'll just share a really quick story. I have a colleague of mine who I've worked with for close to a decade, and 5 years of us working together, he said, "Hey, do you mind doing that talk that you do about the culture of one with my staff?" I said, "Yeah, sure, I'd love to." So we did a workshop, spent a couple hours together, and he's very, very committed to social justice and equity. And he said during this, he said, so he goes, "You might notice that my last name sounds like it's German." He said, "When I was young, I realized that probably there were people in my families that were Nazis. And there's a piece of me that thinks, oh my gosh, there were people in my family that did that. I need to do something to create social justice." And here I'd been working with him for 5 years, and I didn't know that aspect of what motivated him. And I was like, wow. So here's a guy who I've been working with for a long time. After he told me that story, I felt closer to him. I felt like I knew him better. So you can look at these materials and think about, hey, how would I use this to build deeper and stronger connections? Because I loved how you said we talk to each other and we rely on each other. And it's interesting as we get further down in understanding where we're each coming from, it just allows us to even it gives us more strength in our support of one another. And so it really is beautiful, the communities you're working with, and it's important that their voices are heard, right? And as I was listening to you, I'm like, wow, that's great. You're really encouraging people to have voice and to be involved. So thank you for sharing. And I hope that I hope you take these materials and you can kind of run with them. And totally welcome to use any of these materials with the communities you're working with. So thank you. Okay, others. Let's see. Um, Great. I like the comments in the chat. People are complex. Everyone is unique. Absolutely. That's the big thing I'd love for everyone to know. Been thinking a lot about how ACEs have affected my journey. It's a powerful feeling to be able to identify and express who I am. I didn't realize how hard it was for me in the recent past. So again, this piece of the adverse childhood experiences study is really powerful. So Vincent Felitti is a is an internal medicine doctor here in San Diego. He still lives in San Diego. He worked for Kaiser, and he started noticing in the preventative medicine department when people had more difficult experiences in their childhood, it had an impact on their health later in life. And it's a really groundbreaking study that's, wow, about 20, 30 years old now. But it really has allowed us as a community to start talking about these things and looking at it. So early on, about 20 years, 18, 20 years ago, I started talking about these pieces. And now I realize that the other part that's really important is how do we process those traumatic experiences? Because when we process those traumatic experiences, we have what's known as post-traumatic growth. And there's a whole field of study called post-traumatic growth, which is comes out of the cancer literature. So folks who survived cancer often on the other side of it were um, appreciated their relationships. They had a sense of purpose. They wanted to help others. They became, more connected with their spirituality or their religion. So again, having a traumatic event doesn't define you. You are not what happened to you on the worst day of your life. You are so much more than that. And when we can really have the conversations about how do we fuel our growth, and trauma is one of the ways we fuel our growth. Joy is another way. But again, that was such a beautiful comment about it's powerful to identify and express who I am. And that comment really is just a comment that shows how post-traumatic growth really works. You have to become aware, you have to be with the struggle, and you grow. And that's really, really, really powerful. So thank you for sharing that. Yes, and so another great comment, even with our cultural differences and life experiences, we can still agree on our uniqueness and care for others. This is the world that I want to build, right? This is the world that I want to build. I want to build a world where we can actually look at individuals who are unique and celebrate their uniqueness. I also want us to treat everybody with dignity and know that everybody is a human being and is, you know, should be respected for who they are and how they are. And that, uh, as we go into this next section and we start talking about like how do we learn this stuff, how do we become, as anthropologists say, enculturated, and how do we get socialized into this way of thinking and being? So I've given folks a lot of time to reflect, and again, I love Crystal's comment about yes, there's a lot that gets opened up and you start thinking about. And again, depending on how much you've been exposed to this, or if this is newer to you, or if you've seen this, and as somebody mentioned earlier, you're going to another layer of the onion. That's beautiful. And, again, when I laid out sort of the pieces of my childhood and the pieces of my work and professional piece, remember, I've been doing this for years, right? So I looked at these things and I started to really think, does this affect how I see the world? Does this affect the way that I see things? Um, I love child development. One of my other things that I teach on CalTrins is child development. I absolutely love child development. It's like one of my favorite things in the world is to watch children develop and when they need help to be able to help them and help parents help their children. I absolutely love development. I love it so much that everything that I see has a component of development. If you're new to a job, there's a period of time of developing. I call my course child and parent development because parents develop over time. Um, in my work career, I developed over time. So I see everything in that frame of development. And again, like I'm just sharing because I've spent a lot of time doing this and I've looked at a lot of this. That's why you see that richness in what I did. Now, remember, that's over 20 plus years of thinking about this, looking at this. So as you look, you're going to find different places and spaces where you can keep thinking about this. And again, 20 years into this, I'm still learning and growing. Actually, it's more than 20, it's probably 25 years of doing this. I'm still learning and growing, and I'm still enjoying it. And it's amazing. Great. I love the comment. Now with resiliency comes post-traumatic growth. I love it. So the other part, just to add to things, I know there's an upcoming CalTrins training. I'm not sure when it's going to happen, but it's uh, the effect of positive experiences on growth. So we have the adverse childhood experiences, and one of my colleagues, Bob Sege out of Boston, really has been looking at how health outcomes can be improved by positive experiences. And he has a beautiful framework, and he'll be doing a talk on CalTrends coming up. But again, this whole piece that I think is really important is we understand trauma, we understand that you can grow from it, right? And you need to be supported in that. So, can you imagine a world where we're spending that time and energy creating the resources and the opportunities for us to grow from these experiences? And the reason I do talk about trauma in the context of this work is um, many of us identify with the thing that's the hardest in our lives. I have a number of friends that are gay, and in their experience, they grew up in places where that may or may not have been accepted. And where it wasn't accepted, they had to hide that identity. But then finally, they were able to embrace that identity. And then at some point, they, you know, got to a place where they're really comfortable. But if you had to work that hard um, when a majority culture is saying this isn't right, but you know this is who you are, working through that, it's going to contribute to your identity, and you're going to identify with things that you struggled with. And you also are going to feel when you're with others who are similar to you, you're going to feel a sense of belonging. And so this is all part of our human condition and our human nature. I love the idea of, can you imagine if we just did this for everybody from the get-go, if every kid got this message that whoever you are is great, it's beautiful, we want you to be your fullest and best expression of yourself. I call that encouraging children to be for them to understand that they are the love that the world needs and that they express themselves fully. That is who they are. And if they can do that and really love themselves and really express themselves, then that makes the world a better place. And if we can all be open and tolerate, we'll talk about tolerating, affirming, and all these things later on. But just imagine that kind of a world. That's the kind of world I want to see us go to, where everybody is accepted for who they are and that we really appreciate everybody for who they are. All right. I'm going to stop for a minute again, see if that stimulated any combinations. Yes. Good. That's what we want. We want an audience like this. Great. Okay. Any other comments or thoughts or ideas before we go on? Any questions? Anything you want me to go back and talk a little bit more? I know I went through the layers of culture very quickly. And I will leave some room at the end for some questions and some time. But let's go ahead and move forward into this idea of being enculturation and socialization. Just big fancy words of how do you learn culture and how do you learn how to socialize in your world, right? So I'm sharing work by an individual named Bobby Harrow, and you can see the site here. Now it's a busy slide. Don't worry, we're going to go through the different pieces. But she really has two things that she teaches. One is the cycle of socialization and then the cycle of liberation. And we'll be talking about both of those as we go. And I'm going to slow it down here. So again, with the reflections, I know, this material is, again, that stuff that's underneath our radar. But this is how this happens, right? So I want to go through this and go through each piece of this. So we'll start in the blue with the beginning and the socialization, and then the institutions and the other cultural socializations and the enforcements, the results, and how the change happens. And again, what's at the core of all this. So we're going to go through this. I'm going to slow it down a little bit so that we really have some time to think about this. And again, I hope at the end of this time about talking of socialization, you'll be able to see that people are just trying to reinforce the culture that they were born into, because it helps them understand the world, right? So again, we've talked about culture. What is culture? But culture helps us make sense of the world. And that's really, really important. So let's start when we're all little. So when we're little, we're born into a world that already exists. You could call it the frame of the world, right? The frame of a society, the frame of a culture. Take a moment, just think about this. Any baby that's born, unless there's an issue with hearing or speech and language, learns the language that they're born into. It could be Mandarin or Cantonese, it could be Hindi, Marathi, Korean, Spanish, many indigenous languages and dialects. So it's language and dialect. Just think for a minute how amazing that is. You are born with the potential to learn the language of wherever you're born in the world. And this world that you're born into, and your first part of your life, you're born with no guilt, no shame, no consciousness. You come into the world open and wanting to learn, like just engaged, right? This doesn't mean children are blank slates. They come into this world wanting to connect and engage. And that's, like I said, why I love child development so much. But you're not born with any biases. You're not born with stereotypes. You're not born with prejudice. You're not born with a history. You're not born with habits and traditions. And so I like to say that we're all born innocent, right? And we're just innocent. We come into the world innocent. Um, we're going to learn whatever is around us. We're going to learn how to navigate this world, and the adults around us do what's known as the first socialization, right? So the people that we love and we trust teach us, parents, relatives, teachers, peers, mentors. They shape our expectations, our norms, our values, our roles, and models of the way things are being. It's the source of our dreams. It's reinforced by group affiliation. Um, again, who you hang out with, who was taught that same message. I just went back to my 40th high school reunion, and there's some folks that I went to kindergarten with, and you really start thinking about like how we all were learning and growing. These beautiful, pure little 5-year-olds that are just learning their way through the world and making friends. And I like to color with the color blue. You like to color with the color blue. We're friends, right? And it's pretty amazing, right? There's just that level of easy connection. There's this innocence that we see when we're with little children. Again, one of the reasons I love being a pediatrician is little kids just have that beautiful peace. And so innocently as a child, what do? We learn the rules from around us. And again, with pure innocence. And the one thing that I know about all of the parents I've worked with over all of the years, every parent wants the best for their child. And every parent is trying to teach their child how to be successful in the world as the parent knows, right? So again, if we can really see that, then, we really understand that, blame and shame doesn't have a role. The role is really to understand that they were doing their best and they were teaching. And they were trying to teach you how to be successful in the world with some rules that were clear and explicit, and a lot of rules that were implicit, which are under our radar. So go ahead and take a moment to really think about this one. What messages did you receive and from whom? Consider your first socialization, what you were taught on a personal level by parents, relatives, teachers, and peers and mentors, okay? And what reinforced it. Now, some of you have beautifully already commented in the chat that you were born into a certain area and you don't agree with those values. Absolutely. That's part of what we'll be talking about in the next couple of slides, and really thinking about those things of like what comes after that, right? But just give yourself just a moment to really think about who were those people that were teaching you? early in your life. It'll take about a minute or so just to really think about those people. So I'll share with you all that, again, when I was little, it was my parents, my grandparents, family members, parts of folks who were part of our household were there. My parents moved here when I was 18 months, so things shifted. But again, growing up with lots of people, I mentioned that we had a housekeeper who really was like part of the family. So I learned things from her. We had a lot of family friends, learned things from them, had a lot of peer friends, learned from them. But again, there's this beautiful piece of watching parents and their children and the parent helping the child try to navigate through this big complex world that this little child is learning and navigating through. So again, first socialization, you're born innocent, your family's trying to teach you how to make your way through the world. Okay. But then we have institutional cultural socialization, right? We are reinforced or bombarded with messages from. And if you look at this list, I'm going to hone in on schools when we're little, but also churches and businesses and television and language and our legal system, the media, mental health, medicine. I mean, all of these things you're getting on a conscious and an unconscious level. You're teaching things. And we in our family have this joke about the age that little ones who are about, between that 5 and 8 year old range, if you tell them something, they always ask, why? 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 And so we jokingly say that at some point, children become why monsters because that's the word that they love to use. Why, why? They're figuring out their way. Now that's where you're teaching them very implicitly, you're answering their questions. But a lot of this we absorb because again, it's just that bombardment, right? Even when we listen to the lyrics of songs, that's telling us something. When we go to when we go to the doctor, it's telling us something, right? So there's this institutional and cultural socialization that is happening at a conscious and unconscious level. And this is where we start getting this place where it becomes normalized and you don't even ask questions. It's just the way things are. So let's go again to this piece of what messages did you receive and from whom? Consider the cultural institutions around you. So take a minute and think about that and include things like television, media, song lyrics, language, how that impacts things. And just think about this for yourself. Okay. Another wonderful quote or wonderful comment in the chat about the idea of majority culture. Really, really love this comment. So when one uses the term majority culture, it perhaps doesn't consider what's generally considered majority culture, especially in a Eurocentric country or cultures considered first world, is not the global majority, but in fact is the global minority. Absolutely. This is why shifting our lenses and thinking about things from these different perspectives are really important. Maybe instead of saying majority culture, it's the culture that's dominating, right? And again, it's not right or wrong. It's the culture that is determining culture shapes things for others. It's not always healthy, and it's actually really important to think about how do we respond to things like colonialism? How do we respond to racism, to genocide? These are important things, and that point that majority culture probably I think the use of the word dominant culture may be a better use of terms. And again, that's what I love. I love when people bring up questions like that. What does that mean, majority culture? I actually think may go back and change the slides to dominant culture. So the culture that dominates pervades a society, and that's exactly what we're seeing with these things that I'm bringing up. So before I go to the next piece, I want to stop here for a minute and I want to hear from folks. What are some of the things that you can think about as you were growing up that impacted the way that you see things? Um, Great. So some in the chat. But again, folks can come off. All right. I may put my CalTrins team on the spot and see if there's anything that they thought of for themselves.
Do you ask the question about, you said, anybody in CalTrin want to volunteer about what messages did you receive and from whom, if I may? Something I thought was really interesting stepping into this field of social service was the idea of self-care. And the first time I heard it, I said, you mean like, do I have a first aid kit? Like if I have a wound, I'm not a Girl Scout. And they said, no, I mean, like, what do you do for your inside self-care? And I realized when I think about message for my family, love them, they're the best. And they didn't know about self-care either. And so the idea of self-care was selfish. And if
Yes.
you were taking care of yourself, that was neglecting someone else. And so we put others before ourselves. And you know what? They say to become what you want, sometimes you have to unbecome what you were. And so that's taken a lot of work to sit with that and consider that message and that it was very cultural in my family. So I wanted to share that and thank you.
Jessica, thank you. Jess, thank you for sharing that. So I want to run with that a little bit before we go to our break. I want to run with it for a couple of reasons. One, the idea of coming to this field where we're taking care of others and sort of saying, oh, we're so used to taking care of others. And the ethos has always been, well, you sacrifice to take care of others. And it can be not only like in your family, but it's also part of this culture of the folks that are on this call about the idea that, oh, we take care of people. Doesn't that sound a little bit like our identity?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't that sound like you'd have to kind of, like just say, be selfish to take care of yourself first when others have greater needs?
Mm-hmm.
And we learn how to deny our own needs because other people's needs are more important than ours. Okay, so there's that set of beliefs, right? And I'm glad you brought up self-care because in and of itself, it's an interesting term, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just hear this word, caring for oneself and self-care. Does that sound different to anybody? Caring for oneself and self-care.
Completely different.
Okay, how so?
Caring, sorry. Caring for oneself
Mhm,
is an act of love
mhm,
and allows you then to be available to take care of others.
mhm.
And self-care, I agree with Jessica, is the model of you're selfish, you're taking away from somebody else.
And so maybe that should be the title of my first book, Caring for Oneself, a cure for self-care. Um,
Not self-care.
I
but
second that motion. We're waiting for the published. Thank you.
coming from Caltrans in the future. Um, so, but again, I want you all to see that I used the language in a certain way to convey what was important and to make it active instead of a noun. Self-care, caring for oneself. The second one, caring for oneself, is an action that you're taking for yourself rather than something that's over here in abstract. Western culture really does that, right? So we need to learn and listen to the culture to figure out how does this change things. So we're going to come back in after the break, and we're going to talk about some of these things on how these things are enforced. And again, see how subtle that example is and how subtle that change of words is and what a big difference in the impact, right? So that's part of this whole piece of like, what messages are we getting at what levels, right? The other part is we say self-care as a noun, as a thing, when we're really talking about that you need to be supportive in relationships and what supports you rather than care, right? Because again, the stronger we are, the stronger we are for the folks that we help. So with that, I'm going to leave you all with that for a moment. We'll
Second, but I'm so glad that Jess was able to hop in and answer your question. Alrighty, so we will head back into everything. And Pradeep, I will be here, so let me know if you need anything.
great. And it's just fun. And it's actually fun because Jess and I have worked together in the past, so it's really kind of fun to have her as a participant in that way. And again, the reason I asked for the team from CalTrins is they do a lot of this training. And so again, when they're sharing a perspective, again, they're adding something that I think is a layered piece. And again, that partnership is just such an important part to all of this work is we're all partnering together to improve our community. And so the part that's been really fun with me is they've been with me on the material, they've been in the material. And again, as Crystal had mentioned earlier in the piece is when you first hear this, it can like a lot can come and swirl, right? And Jessica shared this piece that was really good and subtle also, right? About self-care and selfishness. And that actually really comes into this next piece so beautifully, right? It's this whole idea of like we're talking about the socialization, right? So you're little, you're born innocent, your family and the people that are close to you are the first ones trying to help you navigate the world. But then they send you out to the bigger world and at school and everywhere you're bombarded by these messages and way things are. So she just shared that beautiful example that, oh, self-care, that means you're being selfish. Now, her family said that, but society reinforces it, right? So this is where we're at, the enforcements. What are the rewards and punishments? What are the supports and what are the stigmas? You receive a positive message when you act to according to what the rules are, even if it's not true, right? You get positive feedback if you do kind of what you're expected to. You receive negative messages when you question things, right? So you have all of this information coming from from society and your family, and they will reinforce it. This is how we do things. Oh, that's not how we do things. And some of you have already kind of shared some of this in your comments, right? So there's things that are enforced and there's things that are sanctioned. We will do this, we won't do that. You're going to be stigmatized or you're going to be rewarded. You're going to be punished or you're going to get a privilege. So we run into this paradigm that we all have good kid, bad kid. This is our society, right? It also can be, being persecuted and discriminated against versus being empowered, right? So we're getting this layering of messages. And again, when we go back and we looked at that definition of culture, its values, its beliefs, right? So this is really important. So think about what does that mean with the enforcements? Well, you start internalizing the feelings and your social standing. Normal, you feel confident, you're secure, you're autonomous, you've got opportunities. If you're not feeling like you're doing the right thing, you can start feeling shame. You can feel silenced. You can feel isolated. You can feel angry and stressed. You can have barriers to achieving. So think about where we are as a society today, right? We've got this battle of right and wrong behaviors and good and bad behaviors, and people aren't respecting one another and aren't really listening and seeing the other that way. So people are becoming more isolated and angry and stressed, and some places silent. And so again, just that whole piece of just seeing how we're undergoing really big cultural shifts right now. And so you can really get to this place where there's a real dissonance if you're part of a society but you don't feel like you fit in. It just feels like you're out of sync. That silence, that anger. We are hearing a lot of language that's very dehumanizing, talking about people like they're something other than human, right? Ignorance, self-hatred, stress, lack of reality, violence, inconsistency, crime, internalization of patterns of power. Okay. So again, this is the result of the socialization when it's gone negative, right? Okay. Oh, I see somebody Does somebody have a hand up?
No, as you were just listing it off, I'm like, oh, he's talking about me. But that's
Okay. Well, and again, this is important, right? This is so important because if we don't talk about it, if we don't point it out, then we don't even have a chance to change, right? Because it starts eating away at us, right? So I want you to think about that. Like, what enforcements have you experienced? What made you rebel? What made you go along? How did those situations or expectations make you feel? Now, before I have you reflect, I want you all to breathe, right? Just breathe. You didn't do anything wrong. People didn't do this intentionally to harm you. It may feel like that, but again, people are acting from their own bubble of perception. So come back and really just take a moment to think about that. What are the enforcements that you've experienced? And you can see how when Jessica shares her comment, you can see like my family said this, and then our society said this, and I thought about it when I came into this community, right? So think about the enforcements. Think about what made you go along, what made you rebel, and how did you feel? And let's talk about this other part of her model, the actions, right? So you can, yeah, disapproval. Yeah, so I'll give you a really quick concrete example that came to mind to me while we were talking. And each time I do this, different things come to mind. When I was a kid, obviously, I was actually, quite talkative, and luckily I was pretty smart. But I also made sure that I didn't stand out too much. I didn't want to be too smart. I didn't want to be ostracized for being too smart. So I tried to find that right place of doing well in school, but not standing out because I wanted to fit in, right? So there was an enforcement of, well, it's good to be smart, but don't be too smart, right? And so again, these are these funny little things that happen. And, coming from a first generation immigrant family, there's a real emphasis on achieving. So again, I had to navigate that at home as well, right? Like my parents had high expectations and I did well, but I didn't want to like stand out. I wanted to be in that right place. So we're navigating all of these different pieces. Okay, so this is an interesting part, right? So why do we reinforce culture? Well, because that gives us a sense of belonging, right? So you can, when you become aware of this stuff, you can say, I'm going to continue to go back to the beginning and just start over again and perpetuate the norms and the biases and all these habits. And when I have kids, I'm going to transmit these same values and not make waves, promote the status quo. Now, I say this, and it may sound like I have an opinion that that's bad to be part of it. Well, there was a beautiful comment early in the chat about someone who brought this point up. We're not saying it's bad. Sometimes you want a culture because it preserves things, it makes people feel safe, it makes people feel connected and belonging. Can we do that without excluding people, is my question. Because again, families have there's families that are really great, healthy families that have this sense of cohesion and connection that gives them strength. Great. Um, and if they're warm and welcoming to others, great. So again, any of these things can be used to promote or limit people. And it's always this tension between belonging and free expression. And it's always a dynamic tension. It's not right or wrong. Again, the whole piece of all of this stuff is is connecting, right? This is a big piece, right? And so, yeah, so again, so great example in the chat about being a part of a military family and moving around and where some people stay in the same place. When I would mention I went to my 40th high school reunion and it was a class of 280 people showed up and people were like, wow, that's a lot of people. I said, yeah, 60 of them live within 3 square miles of where I grew up. And they said, hey, you came from so far. It was really nice. And again, it's not good or bad. They live there. It's really comfortable. They know each other. But if you're the one who leaves that, it's sometimes hard to come back to it, right? And it can give you that sense of not being included. So on one hand, I'm saying, here's this cultural piece, and this model, she's talking about breaking the cycle of socialization, changing, you know, raising consciousness, interrupting, educating, taking a stand. That's a framework, right? And again, that may be good for some people. It may make people feel isolated, right? So this is just choices. And when we really think about it, why do we go along, right? The core of what is driving all of this is fear, confusion, ignorance, confusion. Again, I'm not saying these as judgments. It's what drives our behavior. Why do we go along with what we're taught socially? We know what it feels like to be isolated. The comment in the chat was beautiful about feeling isolated, right? We don't want to feel isolated. We're also scared of what we don't know, right? If we put it in completely biologic terms, our survival is connected to our sense of belonging as a group. Human beings, this is who we are and what we are. We are social creatures who connect to one another. And that sense of belonging helped us survive all of these challenges over all of these years as a species. So this is so deeply driven. And when I say fear and insecurity, confusion and ignorance, I'm not saying them as bad things. I'm saying them as these are the things that are underneath the radar, right? We want to be safe. We want to belong, right? So again, another set of reflections is to really think about a time that you went along with what you were socially taught. And can you think about times when you didn't go along with when you were socially taught? And can you see how powerful our social conditioning is? So again, let's just take a moment to reflect on that. And then we'll be talking about how do we bridge the differences. And again, love, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful comments in the. So again, I mentioned it, but I just want to emphasize this point. When we feel like we don't belong or we feel excluded or isolated, it triggers within us a fear about our survival, right? Think about how powerful that is, right? How powerful the need to get along is. It's not bad. It's just part of how we're wired as a species. And if we can look at it without judgment, we can start moving into some of the things we'll be talking about of like, how do we move through this, right? And how do we learn from it? So before we go much further, I can't do a talk about this without talking about bias, explicit and implicit, right? So explicit bias, it's the attitudes we have on a conscious level that we're aware of. But it's the implicit bias is the unconscious attitudes that's below the surface, right? That we don't see. Does the psychosocialization help you understand how implicit bias is developed? We learn it from those around us. And it's at an individual level, it's at an institutional level, and we can internalize it. I was really lucky. I did an implicit bias test, I think 30 years ago. And no surprise, I had implicit bias. 30 years later, I do the same test. I still have implicit bias. It's implicit. That's what it is, right? So again, we all have faced that and think about that. That we have implicit bias. I'm going to go back to that. Now, I tell this story that I still have implicit bias, not to say I'm a bad person, right? I say it because today I know that I have implicit bias and I'm more aware. We'll be talking about self-awareness and some of these other things that we can do. So now I can see it. I can now not respond because I realize that there's stuff underneath and I'm paying attention to it, right? So again, thinking about like we get these biases from a place of innocence. We're not being malicious about it, right? And so think about this as a group. What did you learn from the cycle of socialization? And reflect on what shaped your beliefs about belonging and mattering through the lens of the cycle of socialization. Your experiences, your friendships, your family, your community, your education, your work, right? So think about this idea of mattering and belonging on how you were socialized. I was very lucky that I grew up in this really large uh, Indian community that immigrated to Cleveland, Ohio. And we grew up and there was like 5 families that were just close to us. These The kids that are my age are like cousins to me. We're not biologically related, but we're just so close to each other. We're still so close to each other, right? And that was just such a great thing to have that sense of belonging, right? And it's been really helpful. And so, again, as we socialize, it can be a source of strength, but it can also limit us, right? We might feel like I can't express myself completely. So, again, all of this stuff has two sides to it. And that's the really, again, somebody had one of the comments in the chat about the whole idea that, people are complex and unique. Absolutely. So, giving you a lot of information, I've given you a lot to think about. Um, let's think about taking some action. Let's think about part 4 here of building bridges, right? We want to build bridges. I don't do this work because I want you just to think about it. I want you to take action. I want you to really think, how do we bridge these different worlds? And so just think about this. Ideally, relationships are two-way communication, cooperation, coordination, and collaboration. Where are the breakdowns? We usually break down on differing needs, values, and levels of trust rather than a lack of interest or unwillingness. I don't want to get political, but I do want us to be objective and look at our current political environment. Where is the breakdown? There's a breakdown of trust. There's a breakdown that we have different values. And there's a breakdown on people's perceived differences in needs, right? And so again, when we come back to the common pieces of our humanity and the common aspects of who we are, we slow down and we realize we actually have similar needs. And while we may have differences in values, we also have similarities in values. And the only way we're going to get to trust is by working together. So in our current challenge, I would actually throw out this idea that let's start thinking about what are the needs at an individual and family level. What are the values at the individual and family level? Move it up to the workplace in our community. Think about the needs as a country. Think about the needs as humanity on the planet. I know these are kind of big ideas, but it all starts with our interactions with one another. And so I come back to this piece is every interaction cross-cultural? And if we take the frame that it is cross-cultural, can we have that respect and humility for others to be really curious? And before we can be curious about others, we have to be curious about ourselves, right? And that's what I really hope the earlier time in this presentation has really made you curious and really is going to ask you to look and have some self-awareness about your personal needs, your values, your attitudes, your beliefs and behaviors, right? And how do they influence you consciously or unconsciously with the people you interact with? What are our assumptions and expectations for others and their behavior? How does level of trust impact our perception and interaction? When we don't trust somebody, what they do can look a lot more threatening just because of the level of trust. How does our level of stress impact our perceptions and interaction? And I want to stop there for a second and just say, right now, we are living through one of the most challenging times in human history. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of what I would call collective anxiety. So if you already have your own anxiety, to be swimming in the ocean that's filled with anxiety around you makes it go up. So we really do need to figure out ways to care for ourselves, right? And to be able to work with our stress and to learn how to self-regulate and to learn how to support one another. When we take the stress down, when we turn the temperature down, then we can really be focused on these connections. And again, one of the things that I think is really important is assumptions. Making assumptions happens automatically, but believing your assumptions become a choice when you train yourself to see them. As I mentioned earlier about my own implicit bias, I've trained myself to see it, so now I can have a choice. And first, you have to become aware of your assumptions, implicit beliefs, and bias. Then you can reflect. You can choose to reframe your underlying beliefs if it serves you. Again, I highly recommend Miguel's book, The Four Agreements. I still think it's selling really well 20 years after it came out. And one of his agreements is don't make assumptions, have the courage to ask questions. And we have a wonderful, wonderful question or wonderful comment in the chat. It's the training that's difficult. Being aware of assumptions takes a lot of intentionality. Absolutely, absolutely. That's why we do things like this, is to take that time to do it. And if we start doing it together as groups and we start saying, hey, this is important to our work and important to our community, then we start doing it more and more together, and we kind of normalize it, and we start saying, it's okay um, to question our way of doing things because we want to come up with a better way of doing it. And I love that comment in the chat. And it's been beautiful because many of you have put in pieces about resiliency as we've talked, and I love that. And what I want you to really think about, and it goes to the comment in the chat, is it is reflection that promotes our growth. And to reflect, we have to slow down. And it's interesting because from my perspective, strength or resiliency is created in the context of relationships. And in our relationships, we have the opportunity to help each other regulate, co-regulate. We have the opportunity to reflect. And as we reflect, we can reframe. And to me, that's what builds resiliency. And a colleague of mine always says, it's said that we learn from our experience, when in truth, we learn from reflecting on our experiences. So again, I'm sharing this framework because I want you to reflect on it. I'd love for you to talk with others, talk with your own family, talk with others, talk with people at work. Let's talk about this stuff because it gives us a chance to reframe how we see the world. And then we can start seeing the commonalities between all of us. This morning, I spent a couple of hours with a group of public health nurses here in San Diego, doing a process called reflective practice. And we talked about what was going on in their lives. And today we talked about one of the nurses had a family that said, I don't want to work with you anymore. And she had the opportunity to reflect on, why do you think that happened? How did you feel about it? Did you understand where they were coming from? And another person pointed out it didn't have to do with you, it had to do with the other person. And so she was really beautifully supported, but you could see her reframing the experience and growing from the experience. And I could see from the time we started to the time that we left, she felt more connected and solid with herself. So again, these are the things that we can do, but we have to, as the comment in the chat said, we have to be intentional about it. So as we build these bridges to others, it becomes really important to build trust, to learn about other people, their needs, their ways of responding, what their behavior is saying. We teach parents all the time, your child's behavior is a language. Your child is acting that way because they're trying to fill a need or they're trying to do something. They're not using words, they're using behavior. Ask with openness and genuine curiosity. I think you can hear it in the way that I go through the world. I'm open and curious. I make friends everywhere because I actually am really interested in people, and I think people are very interesting. When we're doing work with others, set an expectation, but check in to make sure it's understood. We're only responsible for what we say, not what the other person hears, right? And the only way we can understand what the other person hears is by checking in with them. And that's that whole piece of encouraging two-way communication, being focused on people's strengths, creating positive moments and memories and stories, creating a sense of belonging, a sense of us. And for about a decade now, I've been teaching this concept of our family's unspoken questions. And one of those unspoken questions is feeling safe. So think about what makes you feel safe. What makes another person feel safe? Think about what creates trust. How in an interaction with both verbal and nonverbal do you know when you are trusted, right? What helps another person feel heard and felt by you? Like, I'm there for you. I know you're there. We all have that experience. And what helps another person feel important to you, that they belong and they matter? I think this is the most important stuff I do these days. I listen to our frontline staff in my projects. I listen to everybody, and I listen in a way that the other person knows that they matter. And how do I know that? It's again all by feeling sense. But I'm also very intentional, and I think about what creates trust. So, benevolence, the degree that the other person takes your best interest at heart and protects them, right? I'm a pediatrician. I want the best for every kid and every family. And, that's what matters to me. The reliability you can depend on, how much you can depend on somebody, how consistent they are, how likely are they to follow through. One of the comments in the chat earlier is, my word is my bond, is a value, right? So when you have that value, people find you reliable. Are you competent? Can you do what you say you're going to do, right? Honesty, being transparent, representing the situation fairly. Been in a lot of situations where I've had to give hard and bad news to parents, but I need to be honest when their child is sick of what could happen and what couldn't happen. You don't want to be harsh, but you can't sugarcoat it. You need to be honest. And when you're honest, then that's again where that trust develops. And then the openness. Um, we had a wonderful interaction in the chat when somebody asked me the question about majority culture. And I realized, hey, wait a second. You're right. Dominant culture is the way. So I was open to it. I'm supposed to be the expert here talking to you all, but I just want to be better at what I do and I want to be more clear. So I really appreciate that this person brought up something and I'm like, I like that. I'm going to use that, right? And that openness allows people to then really look at this way that I have always taught about communicating. When I communicate with people, as soon as I start talking, they can see that I have a willingness to listen. I'm open. I'm humble. I don't make assumptions that I know anything about that person. And I'm very understanding, right? So again, I lead with respect. I follow through with empathy and curiosity, right? So I'm curious, but I'm respectful and I'm also empathetic. And if someone says, I don't want to talk to you, I'm okay with that. There are a lot of other people to talk to. I like this slide. Your body language says you've lost interest. And these statistics are old, and I hope they're still true. But when we communicate, it's 7% our words, 38%, what you hear, and 55% what you see or what's happening, right? So the nonverbal communication is really important. And we're coming to the end. So again, I want you to have questions and other pieces, but I want to share a story with you. I run a conference, and so I have the opportunity to meet a lot of speakers, and I spend a lot of time with the speakers. And I had an individual who was born in a female body, but really identified as male. And they were presenting, they were giving us the lived experience perspective. And I happened to have lunch with them. And so we spent a lot of time together. We talked, and as we were talking, getting to the time where lunch was over, and I said, "Listen, I just want to thank you so much for your openness and sharing your experiences so openly and so vulnerably, and it really has been an honor to speak with you." Um, and he looked at me and said, that literally was one of the most affirming conversations I have ever had. He said, everywhere through the conversation, you were so affirming to me. And it made me stop and think, and made me really think about this diagram that I'm showing you. When I started out in medicine, we were talking about, you have to be able to have tolerance for other people's beliefs and an openness. So there's this notion of tolerance. We were teaching tolerance. And then, later on in my career, I learned that, you really have to be accepting and being really open. And then I realized through this conversation with this individual that because of their experience and because they'd been marginalized and they had been pushed out of our society and not included in a way where they didn't feel like they mattered or they belonged, when he said to me, that was so affirming, I was like, wow, that has to be the way that I communicate from now on. I have to be able to affirm the other person. And I have to understand that a lot of people feel marginalized, a lot of people feel traumatized. And if I can communicate in a way where a person feels seen and heard, then isn't that a powerful, healing way of interacting with people? And so, again, like I mentioned, I started out with how do I communicate better as a physician? And then I started looking at the cultural piece of it. And now I'm kind of looking at like, how do we have these interactions that are healing and uplifting for people? And I think this is the way of like being intentional, really thinking about it. That said, I still step in cultural potholes all the time. So in our reflection guide, we have a section included of what do you do when you step into a cultural pothole? And if every interaction is cross-cultural, then whenever we have a conversation that doesn't go well, what can we do? And I shared with you what I do. I admit that I said something unskillfully. I ask, are you willing to share your perspective? Not even 99 out of 100 times. I think 999 times out of 1,000, the person is so happy to share with me their perspective and to help me see them better. So that's what I do. But I just want to stop here for a minute and really think about that. And to think about what else can we do when we step into a cultural pothole. So one of the reasons I love doing these talks is every once in a while I say something and I go, oh, wow, that connects to other work that I do. So I'm having one of those moments. So I'm going to share it with you all. There is a pediatrician and a psychoanalyst. His name's Donald Winnicott, and he is, gosh, I think from the 60s, a British pediatrician. He was a wonderful gentleman who was very observant of how parents and children interact. And one of the things that Winnicott talks about is when we are connected to our children and we're attuned to them, there's that beautiful connection in our relationship. But that attunement that we have with our children can't be 100%, because otherwise they would never become their own person. And so he talked about this concept of rupture and repair. And he said, it's not the rupture that matters, it's the repair. So when we are connected to a person and that breaks, that's not the problem. The problem is when we don't reconnect. And so as I'm thinking about what do we do with cultural potholes, it's really an opportunity for rupture and repair. And so the important part is the repair is the important part. The finding a way back to being reconnected after we have that moment of disconnection or misunderstanding is really the road forward for us. So again, I just want to share kind of the beauty of these kind of, to me, even though I'm presenting, I consider it a dialogue that we're having, and we're starting a dialogue, which I'd love to see continue. And I'd love to see this go deeper and deeper, and spread throughout our entire communities. But again, just think about that idea that there's a rupture and a repair. And it's, again, like post-traumatic growth. It's how do we turn it into something where we can grow? So we're coming to the end a little bit. I've got a few more slides, but I really want to kind of take a few more opportunities to think about that. And here it is, that the ruptures, the wounds. I really want us to really think about, again, the context of what are, yeah. So again, before we leave, it's beautiful. Again, with cultural potholes, someone has a nice answer, apologize and ask the question so you don't do it again. Absolutely. And showing that fact that you can say, oh, I did something, and you take the responsibility, opens the door for the other person to come towards you. That's beautiful. Thank you. Um, so I want to come back and kind of say, what are American values? And we have a majority culture and we have a minority culture, or should I say we have a dominate culture. And think about those values. And I also want to say, think about the idea of the unfulfilled promise of us. That's the promise that America has, is that we will have you come in and be part of it. And really thinking about things like the unhealed wounds or ruptures. So I just work on this as well. And I think about the ideas that with families that are Native American or families that are African American, our government actually did things to destroy family and culture. Think about colonization. Many people who live in this country are from countries that have been colonized. And, it's one thing to think about the problem. I like to think about the promise. If we heal those things, if we come together and say, yes, there was things that were done that were bad and people were hurt, but we want to heal the hurt, just think of all that human potential that is being trapped by that hurt currently. Just imagine a world where we're so honest and open with each other to say that, yeah, when something bad has happened, we want to come together and find a way to help the person who was hurt in a way that allows them to have dignity and strength, and to think about what beauty is added by each individual to the mosaic of humanity, and what are common human values. So I want to sit here for a little bit and I want to hear from you all about this. And I really want to have that as a dialogue, because I think this is, as we look at this work, this is, oops, I went backwards. My computer, I apologize. My computer is getting a mind of its own. It's showing its own values. I really want us to be thinking, this is where this work, I'm hoping, is taking us. And I just want to see where you all are with this and to see how these things resonate, or was there just too much material? And we are in our third hour, so I do recognize that it has been quite a training. So I just want to sit here and get some comments and some thoughts and feedback on these things. What is American values? What are human values? What are some of these unfulfilled promises? And just see what you all think. I have some stuff happening in the chat. Yep, Japanese, Chinese, American experience. I need to leave, no problem. Um, yeah, there's an experience of the Japanese internment camps that happened in this country. Um, I'm glad someone brought up the Chinese American experience as well, because people came from China to build the railroads. I grew up in the Midwest, and on the East Coast, we have a lot of Italian, Irish, and Polish families that came over many generations ago. And so, again, watching how different groups kind of come in and what they do is also very interesting. Yes, we all want the best for our loved ones and ourselves. Absolutely. America, be independent, don't ask for help. Many other cultures are more communal. Yep, these are good ones. Human values, be kind to one another. Isn't that like the real golden rule, right? Like, treat others well.
It's a conflict for me. I don't completely understand or really know for certain what American values are. I have an idea of what I see and what I experience, and I don't
Mhm.
align with a lot of it. So I am a rebel in a sense, and often conflicted in spaces. Uh,
Mhm.
so even when you put American values, I was like, I don't even subscribe to that. But if so it's like, uh,
Yes.
and then I love the fact about the human piece of it, the human values, and those are what I'm like. I can talk about that and kind of, removing kind of the divides and even the whole majority dominant, all of that piece. It's all like constructs that we continue to like you said, keep going, continue the status quo. We're going to break and do different. And I think that's what I'm having the conflict. I'm like, I don't even want to talk about it. I want to break. So what do we need to do to break those thoughts
I-
or what the norm is?
Absolutely. And Crystal, I love that you said this because the interesting piece is I see values, I hear what they are, and there's not a consistency, and it doesn't align with the human values, it doesn't align with my deeper values. That conflict is part of where the conversations need to go, right? And the challenges have to be there. And all of what you said is stuff of, I think many other people on the call are feeling the same way. That's why it's great when someone shares like that, right? There's some beautiful things in here, um, like I'm sorry, equality without being the same, right? That's a promise that's not fulfilled, right? We haven't reached that yet. We haven't evolved to that yet. So I like that you pointed out that there are these ideals that we haven't reached yet. And when we locate it in human, in that in the common humanity, then we have a much better chance of getting there. I think there's a great one about America. Money equals success and is the ultimate point of driving things forward. Absolutely. That's part of going back to your point, Crystal, of the inconsistency. People say something, but it's like all about the money. And that's not consistent with valuing others and nurturing others, right? Um, absolutely. Human values. Each individual has value and beauty. Absolutely. And the value, the beauty, the beautiful differences enriches our differences. Absolutely. It's a culture of having more so that and other cultures have a more of a sense of being. Great. And again, I'm not bringing this up because there's a right answer or I have the right answer. The pieces is these are the conversations I think we need to have of even saying when you throw up American values, I don't know what that means. That's why it's in quotations. Is what does it mean? Right? Oh, I love life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Again, are we consistent with that? Are we living to that promise? Children should be protected. Totally human value, right? Like that our children are precious. Human value, community, people yearn for interaction. Yes, the connectedness is all of it. So there's no right answers and it's not easy. And I'm glad that you're all thinking about this in this level of the complexity that we're in, right? And there's not a simple solution for complexity, but can we have clarity? Can we find clarity? And I see it in the comments, like Crystal, that you shared. While you might feel like you weren't being like, that things aren't so clear, you're clear in that something's not right and that we need to move towards that. I love that. Um, and others have been putting in here the pieces of where do we need clarity? Where do we need to focus? Where do we need to be good about things? This perspective, yeah, clinical psychology, counseling, culturally diverse. Absolutely. We need to be looking at universals, safety, opportunity, freedom. These are beautiful pieces. And again, I use the term unfulfilled promise because I am very hopeful that we can still get there. And right now we're at a very challenging time. And we want to see what happens as we go forward. Can we start putting these values that we're talking about into action? So again, I just love the conversation. And sometimes these conversations are going to have some ambiguity and some pieces that are there. Here's what many of us feel now is the unpromised is this is beautiful. What many of us feel about the unfulfilled promise of the US is how those who were not white have always felt and experienced the US. What a beautiful what an insightful comment, right? So what happens when you're marginalized or you don't fit in with the dominant values? Well, you want to fight. And I'd actually say we're in this process of evolving. I mentioned how women's rights are really important to me. I still think we have a lot more progress to make for women's rights, right? And I look at it from the place of all of that potential, all of that incredible, incredible intelligence that we're not supporting to get out. That's why I'm big on women's rights, is I feel like there's still so much beautiful potential that we haven't set up to to succeed. Yeah, we do have to help the dominant culture to not be so fearful. That is actually a lot of what's going on. There's a lot of fear of people saying that we have been in charge and we don't want to give it up. And one of my favorite lines of a friend of mine, he always says, when we share power, there's more power, and the world needs more power. And I always add to it, and that power is love. So, again, these are the things that we have to come back to, these values and these pieces that we want to have. And again, it takes time, it takes that energy of wanting those changes. And so we're coming into, and thank you all for sticking through. Many of you have stuck through. This is 3 hours, and I know that it can be hard, but I just want you again to breathe and to appreciate that we're in community, we're on a journey. How beautiful it is to be in a place where everyone is respectful, everybody has been um, open and honest. So just, before you go off to the rest of your day or your evening, just want you to take a second to breathe and to appreciate your investment of being here. Again, I want to appreciate the CalTrins team for really making this so easy. And again, for you to all be here on an afternoon in the holiday season, just really appreciate every one of you. And, so I'm going to leave you with those closing thoughts that the world to me, this is the metaphor that, as somebody said, we want our children to be safe. This is a cartoon, but you can see the love and nurture on this father's face, right? So I'm going to leave you with that. I know we've got a few things. Casey, you're going to help kind of put it all together at the end. But I just want to thank everybody for being here, taking the time to be here. And I'd like to say, let's keep the conversation going and let's, you know, let's put our values into our society instead of the values that have been there. Let's make this set of values of caring, nurture, and wanting the best for others to be where we evolve to as a species. So thank you all so much. I really enjoyed being here with you all.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say thank you, Pradeep, for coming in and talking about this. I know this is you're obviously one of our favorite trainers here at CalTrin. But now you all can see why we love him so much and why this topic is so important. And so he's the perfect person to talk on this topic. He has so much insight. And so thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Also, thank you so much to our participants. For putting things in the chat, really helping discussion, sharing your own experiences. That truly is what makes, I believe, CalTrin trainings so great. Because we do encourage that. And so I know we have talked about this training today. I will always encourage you to please go out and check out Pradeep's previous trainings with us in our training archive. And so with that being said, we're going to go ahead and drop the link for you in the chat for the survey. Lana's so fast. She already did that as soon as I was saying it. So you can click on that link. It'll open up into a separate window and you can go ahead and close out of today's Zoom meeting and that link should still stay open. If for some reason you're not able to do the survey today, don't worry. We're going to also send the survey in the follow-up email that you receive along with the slides that we used today, the note-taking slides, and the reflection workbook as well, and some other wonderful resources for you to check out, as well as hopefully some previous trainings by Pradeep. And so thank you so much for being here today. I know Laura says, are we going to be able to see the training again? Yes, you will. We will have the recording for that. So if you are in today's training and you're like, I need to spread this word, I need my team to see this, I want to be able to even do it as a strategic planning, going over what is our organization saying as far as how are we including culture in what we're doing and how are we baking it into our program. You can take this recording. Again, it's free, and share that with your team. So we highly encourage you to do that as well. And of course, we will always have and try to have this training in the future as well. And so we plan on keeping this training because it is very, very important. So as you are exiting today, make sure that you keep an eye out on your registration email for that follow-up email with the recording and all the goodies that we talked about today. And for anybody who's wanting those CEUs, you can click that same link that Lana dropped in the chat, and it will follow you all the way through to fill out some questions for our feedback, and then it will guide you to filling out the information that we will need to give you your CEUs. So with that being said, I don't have anything else to add. I hope that if my first timers are still in here, that you had a wonderful first training and we got you hooked. And I hope to see you in future CalTrin trainings. And so with that being said, I will go ahead and I will close out today. And then we will close in here in just a few minutes, close the room. But if you have any last minute questions, please feel free to throw those into the Q&A pod and or put them in the chat, or feel free to come off mute while we still have some time together.
And I'm happy to stay around if anybody wants to speak in that window.
Thank you for an amazing presentation. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
If you have more presentation, sign me in. I love to learn today. I learned a lot today. Oh my
Thank you.
God, all the information, it's in my head right now. It's like, great, all this, it's a lot of information, but thank you so much. And I love CalTrin for all the information they're giving to us, because every day you learn something new.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Last night I told my daughter, tomorrow I have to be at class with CalTrin. I said, 1 to 4, 3 hours, sit down. But it's something, and I told her the name. I said, Mommy, it's going to be interesting. I hope so, because I'm going to be sit down for 3 hours. And she's like, I love for you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We will go ahead and, since we don't have any other questions, we will go ahead and close out today's meeting. So thank you all for being here so much, and I hope that you have a great rest of your day.